smart. So because of that, they couldn't explain the world around them. So they attributed it to God and supernatural, to gods and supernatural things. I don't think so. And it all comes down to the speed of light. So stay with me. I'm going to go to physics again, but I'm going to bring it all back. The speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. It was discovered a few hundred years ago. It was discovered by a Danish astronomer named Ole Romer. So the speed of light being measurable in a constant, it is the basis of modern physics. It is how we have the model of the atom, is how we were able to infer all the great breakthroughs in physics that we have to this day by people like Max Planck and Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and Einstein. I know there's debate about how smart Einstein actually was, but whatever, his discoveries in relativity, all that kind of stuff is based on the speed of light being a constant and being measurable. Now, before the 17th century, it was assumed that the speed of light was infinite, that it was instantaneous. You turn on the light, boom, there's light. You bring in a candle, instant. Sun rises, instant. Problem is with that, you can't measure infinity, so you can't do any predictive models. But once it was discovered that light had a discrete speed and it was constant, well, now you can use mathematics and probability in order to make predictive models. And again, that's the basis of all of our modern physics. Fast forward to 1988, an amazing discovery was made by two scientists in Australia, Barry Setterfield and Trevor Norman. They discovered that the speed of light is not constant, that is, in fact, slowing down over time. Now, in very minute increments, not so much that it would alter your day-to-day plans or that you'd notice, but it's happening. They discovered that it's happening measurably and predictably and logarithmically, or kind of exponentially. So over time, the speed is greater. The dispersion between speed is greater. It's kind of like compound interest. I know that Sam, you and Johnny and Howie, you guys have your financial show, which I listen to, and I've made some money, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
You talk about compound interest, where let's say you save $500 a month and put in an 8% fund, and over 10 years, doesn't look like it's growing that much. 20 years, it's okay. But then towards the end, as you get towards retirement, it starts doubling and tripling over and over again. So over time, it goes from not too much to like, boom, making a ton of money. That's how this logarithmic scale works with the speed of light. Okay, as usual, when Setterfield and Norman published their paper, scientists rejected it. They said, nope, no way, you guys are idiots, you're crazy, because scientists are as dogmatic as any red-faced Alabama preacher. They don't want to change. They have to be dragged kicking and screaming to every new discovery. We know this like during COVID, like when any doctor or scientist would say something that challenged whatever the common belief was, they would get kicked out of the hospital or told villainized, whatever. That's how scientists are. But eventually they had to come to the conclusion that the speed of light is slowing down. And this is something you can find easily. You can Google speed of light slowing down, and what you will find is that the scientists admit, the scientific community admits it's happening, but they don't attribute it to Setterfield and Norman. They attribute it to another scientist, I think he's either Russian or Eastern European, in 1998, 10 years later. Why don't they give Norman and Setterfield credit? Well, one of the reasons I believe is because Setterfield and Norman were both Christians, and they've made some conclusions based on their discovery that we're going to talk about. But here's the thing: this should have been the biggest story in science of the last century, because again, all of our physics is based on the speed of light being a constant. If it's not constant, it changes the rules of physics. It changes the predictive models in staggering ways, but no one talks about it. You can find it. And if you even want to find the paper, you have to put into Google speed of light and then put in Setterfield or Norman. Then you'll find their 88 paper.
Wow.
But the reason is that if the implications of it slowing down could really upset the apple cart of secular science. All right. Okay, so speed of light is slowing down. What does it have to do with the spiritual realm? Here we go. Strap in. If the speed of light is slowing down, then that means that next year, 2025, the speed of light will be slower than it was this year, tiny bit, minute. But it also means that last year, 2023, speed of light was a little bit faster. Again, nothing you'd notice, but it was faster. So then 100 years ago, in 1924, speed of light was a good chunk faster. Again, nothing noticeable yet. Your grandparents wouldn't say, you know what, when I was your age, the speed of light was fast. No, they wouldn't have noticed it. But if you go back further, scientists who have studied this have speculated that if you go back 2,000 years, first century, the time that Jesus walked the earth, the speculation is if the regression is steady, that the speed of light would have been 100 times faster during the time of Jesus than it is today. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Well, let's make it more dramatic. Let's go back 8,000 years to the time of the so-called ancients, probably the time of Noah, maybe even the time of Adam and Eve, depending on how you do the aging. 8,000 years ago, if it was a steady state of decline and increase, the speed of light would have been around 10,000 times faster than it is today.
How do you comprehend that? How do you comprehend that? Like, you turn on the lights and the light's already there. How are you going to make it that 10 times?
Right. So here's how it would mean that the world physically would have looked much different. Light would have been brighter. Colors would have been more vivid. Our bodies would have been stronger and more durable. Why? Because remember that electron, the thing that gives us the simulation of solidity, spins around the nucleus at about 1% of the speed of light. If it's spinning thousands of times faster, that magnetic field is thousands of times stronger, meaning that we would have been more durable, more solid, closer to the spiritual realm.
So when you hear people say they've lived for 10,000, like 1,000 years, that could have been possible with those numbers.
Yeah, you know where I'm going. I'm going to go there with that. Yeah, you're ahead of me, but yes, absolutely. So the physical prospects are staggering, but let's talk about the spiritual. Let's talk about the mental, because here's the thing. Our thoughts are electric. Electricity, speed of light. When we think, again, as I said before, there's electricity happening there. They're your brain cells, your neurons, they're called dendrites and axons. Those are the names of the neural cells. The dendrite looks kind of like a tree. I'm holding my hand up here, so it looks kind of like this. You have a shaft and you have these little branches. When you have a thought, an electric pulse goes between the two dendrites. They don't touch. There's a spark that goes between them, and that spark goes at the speed of light. That's your thought process. Now, the speed at which you think is your intelligence. Your intelligence is, by definition, is the speed at which you can process thoughts. We even use a terminology today. If someone's not very smart, we say, what do we say? We say they're slow because it takes them a long time to process a thought. So the faster you can process a thought, the smarter you are. If people were thousands of times, if the speed of light was thousands of times faster in the ancient world, people would have been thinking thousands of times faster than we can today. They would have been incredibly smart. Maybe this explains how they were able to do things that we can't do today. The pyramids, some of these ancient structures, some of the things they understood. But let's talk about their perceptions. Because when we look at something, we don't see with our eyes. Our eyes are the window that takes the information in. We see, and our brains process it. So we see with our brains. Our perceptions in the ancient times would have been thousands of times faster and better. I think that the ancients could perceive the spiritual realm. I think the reason that they the reason that they believed in the spiritual and the so-called gods, the Elohim, is because they could perceive them to a greater degree than we can today. They were smarter than us, they had deeper perception, and they were able to interact with the spiritual realm, maybe even able to manipulate the spiritual realm. They understood it better. They understood the vibrations. They could move things. Possibly, you had a guest on. I know you want to talk, Sam. I'll let you. I'll let you talk.
No, I'm just trying to figure out. Go on.
You had a guest last summer, and she was talking about how she believed that the Tower of Babel incident, where the languages were confused, that before Babel, everyone communicated telepathically. We would just think into each other's brains. And what God did in Babel was he turned that switch off, and we had to now communicate with sounds, with vibrations. But before that, her theory was that we use vibrations to move things around. And that would explain how we move the pyramid, the stones of the pyramid that you talked about before, Exegy. If you have the right frequency, you can change them from being, tons, weighing tons to weighing very little, move them around, then they become heavy again. There are certain monoliths and stone structures, I think in Gobekli Tepe, where it looks like the stone was melted into another stone. It looked like, that they were liquefied and then made hard again. That could be what was happening with the vibrations. So if we're thinking that quickly, telepathy doesn't sound all that far-fetched. Maybe that's how we were communicating. That's maybe, and then that changed. So the reason that we don't experience the spiritual realm is not because the spiritual realm went away. We're just too dumb to see it. We're so much slower. Our minds are so much slower now that we can't perceive the spiritual realm to the same degree that the ancients could.
Now,
and yeah,
go on. Sorry, go on. Finish your thought.
Well, no, that's pretty much it. I mean, because we think again that they were just, they were primitive and they attributed everything to the gods because they couldn't understand it. And we're so smart because we have cars and iPads. No, it's the exact opposite. The speed of light is deteriorating. And I'm going to answer, and I want to talk about why I think it's deteriorating, but I want to let you talk.
Okay, go on. That was my question. Like, first of all, what was the study that said that the speed of light is slowing down? Or is that
it was a study by Barry Satterfield and Trevor Norman. They did some observations and they discovered that it was slowing down. And again, it's accepted by the scientific community now. As if you Google it, you'll see the research. It's just not, they don't make a big deal out of it because, again, well, I'll tell you why. How it would upset the apple cart. Remember, all of physics is based on the speed of light being a constant. That includes radioactive dating. That's how we date. That's how scientists date things, using the decay of radiation, like carbon-14 or potassium argon. So they find a bone of a dinosaur or an ancient stone or whatever. Because everything has a certain amount of these radioactive components in them, even our bodies. Everything has it. And so they look at the half-life of these radioactive particles and how much of it is left. And they can say, okay, well, there's only this much of this radioactive particle left. Therefore, at the steady rate of decay, it means that this bone must be this many millions of years old. But that radioactive decay level is based on the speed of light being constant. If the speed of light is not constant, if it was exponentially faster in the past, then they can't accurately date things millions of years. In fact, Satterfield and Norman believe that if they were correct with their assessment, then you can't prove that the Earth is more than a few thousand years old through radiocarbon dating or any kind of radioactive dating. And this would completely mess up the secular worldview because
good luck
because evolution requires millions of years because of the laws of probability. Evolution says that we're the result of beneficial accidents, which are highly improbable. You even take something, give an example of something with a high probability, a coin flip. You flip a coin, 50-50 chance, heads or tails. So let's say in order for evolution to be true, you have to flip a coin and have it come up heads 100 times in a row. Unlikely. You do it all day, it's not going to happen because over time, it's 50-50. If you do it for 100 years, it's probably unlikely. But the speculation is if you are flipping that coin over and over again for billions of years, at some point, you'll get 100 heads in a row. That's what they're relying on. So you need a lot of time for evolution to be true. If the world is only a few thousand years old, evolution is impossible. Well, I mean, it's impossible for a lot of reasons. And I have a whole series on that on Faith by Reason, but it messes up the whole millions, billions of years thing. And that's why they don't want to talk about, that's why it's not popularized, even though it should have been one of the biggest discoveries in recent history.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So we wonder why the ancients were so spiritual and they could do all these great things because they were bigger, stronger, sturdier, smarter, better perception. And we are slower, smaller, dumber, and over time it's getting even worse.
Hey, Ed.
Yes.
And if this is leading somewhere, please tell me, and I'll wait. But
Okay.
is your perception that this is somehow part of the plan that the deity has for humanity, this slowing down of the speed of light, and is it leading toward end times? Is it somehow tied into that? I'm curious about that.
It is, absolutely it is. And because it wasn't his plan. His plan was for us to be with him in perfect harmony with him forever. Our actions cause things to slow down. So actually, Johnny, let me go there because I'll wrap. This is my final question to kind of bring everything together. So if the speed of light is slowing down, then question is why? From a spiritual standpoint, let's go all the way back to creation. If God created everything perfect, there wouldn't have been any deterioration. There wouldn't have been the second law of thermodynamics, which states that over time things break down. That's a result of man's actions. But initially, if God made us connected to himself, he made Adam and Eve and all creation connected to him, which means even though it was physical, those electrons were spinning way faster. They were maybe spinning close to the speed of light. So, and that's why Adam and Eve were immortal. They didn't break down. The speed of light was probably infinitely faster. And Adam and Eve could interact with God. Remember, we see in Genesis chapter 3 that God would walk and talk with them in the cool of the day, in the evening. So Adam and Eve, God created Adam. He breathed into them the breath of life. He gave him a spirit. And he told them that you're the king and queen of the earth. You rule it during the day. Go have sex, go make some babies, and turn the whole world into Eden. That was a point. And then when you're done with that, end of the day, we can walk and talk. And we just hang out. That's what God wanted. And
that's
they were
a great
immortal.
Plan, dude.
I think so. And that's what's going to happen at the end. That's the beginning and the end of the Bible have the same. At the end, it says in the last book of Revelation, it says that now the dwelling place of God is with man, and we're just going to hang out again. He's going to wipe away all the nonsense, and that's a part of my Revelation series. So so initially, we were spiritual material hybrids, but we were at such a high level with the speed of light being so much faster that we could interact with the spiritual realm regularly. We were part of God's high council. Adam and Eve were the material representatives of the earth. Now, of course, the so-called serpent, the actual word is Nahash, which is translated serpent. It actually means the shining one. And he was a shining reptilian being. I think he was jealous. And he proposed that, hey, you guys have it good here, but you could have it better if you eat this fruit. If you eat the fruit, then you will be like the Elohim. You'll be like the gods. And they said, sure, let's do that. So that's really the origin of all so-called sin, is people or entities wanting to have more than what was in God's perfect plan. And because of that, they intentionally disconnected themselves from God. And I want to ask one quick aside here. People always ask, why did God even put the forbidden fruit in there? Why would he do that? Because he wanted Adam and Eve to love him. Love is a choice. You cannot force someone to love you. You can only love someone if you have the option of not loving him. So God said, look, I'm giving you everything. I only have one rule. Just don't eat this one piece of fruit. And of course, we screw up and do that. But when they did that, they intentionally disconnected themselves from the light of God. And that's when I believe the speed of light started slowing down, because they were no longer connected to the infinite light of God. And they slowed down. Now, they still were much hardier than we were in the ancient times. They still lived, 800-900 years. But then the next big thing happened, which was when the fallen Elohim came down and had intercourse with women, because, again, they wanted something that was outside of what they were allotted. They wanted to make their own physical, spiritual hybrids, which we call the Nephilim. And I know we've had tons of shows on the Nephilim. So
that's some Nephilim shit right there.
Yeah. So, and then the Nephilim basically take over the earth to the point where it's implied that Noah and his family were the only pure human beings left, because the Nephilim literally devoured them. In the book of Enoch, it talks about how they basically started cannibalizing human beings.
Oh,
so that seems to be like another big judgment where the speed of light slowed down dramatically, because after the flood, we became less durable and we only lived to 120 years. But and I think the reason that the Elohim were able to have intercourse with women is because, they were more solid, they were hardier, they could, well, to be graphic, they could take it. They could take the sexual interaction with these Elohim because they were hardier, and it doesn't happen now because I think they would, maybe they would shatter. I don't know. Again, don't want to get too graphic, but well, this is a tinfoil hat. I can get as graphic as I want, probably.
Yeah, go
But
for it,
yeah,
bro.
they would, they couldn't handle it today, so there are other means that they do their mischief genetically.
Would this also account for why the Old Testament seems to be for, almost for a rougher type of person? Do you know what I mean? It's like a hardier, because there are so many accounts in the Old Testament where it's just like, are these really the same people that we are? You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem right. Yeah.
There's been a steady regression because there's been that steady regression in the speed of light. There's been a steady regression in our substance. We're becoming less and less substantive. And I'm going to get to your point in just a second, Johnny. But the whole reason the reason behind it is, as man gets further away from God, the speed of light gets slower because they're further away from the source.
Is there any chance that this is done purposefully to just the nature of the simulation is like, after a while it just starts to slow down, like
it's breaking down.
You play a video game so much, after a while it starts acting up, and it starts.
Yeah, there are glitches in the matrix. I think that's happening. Again, it's not God's will, because God does not initiate his will anymore. He only responds to us through justice. So Johnny, you talked about the end times, and again, Norman and Setterfield and some of the other scientists, they were basically assuming that their increase or decrease in the speed of light happened in a steady state. And again, I think there were big events where it happened dramatically. I think original sin was a dramatic drop off. The flood was a dramatic drop off. And I think when we get to the end times, there's going to be another dramatic drop off, and things are just going to get worse and worse until you get to the end, where basically everything is going to melt. In the epistle of Peter, he talks about how at the end the elements are going to melt and heaven and earth are going to pass away. Eventually, things are going to slow down so much. The entropy is going to become so just so intense that things won't be able to hold together anymore.